I would like to acknowledge that the Games Institute, as part of the University of Waterloo, and also where I live, because I live very close to campus, we are located on the land that was taken without consent from the First Nations of Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Neutral Peoples. The land was then promised back to those First Nations in what we call the Haldeman Tract, and that encompasses the land 6 miles or 10 kilometers on either side of the Grand River. We know that Canada and Ontario, as any province in Canada and territory, we are struggling with the history of colonization, and so I would like us to all take a moment to think what that means to be sitting on the land that was promised to First Nations and was, for historical reasons, is not in their custodianship. I will also say that at the Games Institute is we are trying to do our best to include marginalized voices, and I would like to hear on behalf of the Institute and hopefully collectively on our collective behalf, encourage us to facilitate as much as we can within our spaces to facilitate the and uplift and empower voices that have been marginalized and silenced for generations. And so let us try to undertake whatever we can to make space for Indigenous scholars, designers, community leaders, and creators. With that, welcome to a very special guest talk, and very big thank you to our HCI lab meeting at large, a lab group at large that they had facilitated changes to their own lab schedule so that we could have Matt present his scholarly journey and some of his work to us today. Matt actually visited the GI just for a couple of hours on Tuesday and had some conversations with Neil and myself. And we hope to have him here maybe again in the winter term, who knows. So you will hopefully get an opportunity to speak to Matt. Matt is an associate professor of the arts at the NYU Game Center. And he's also the area head for programming and director of special projects. And I can read off Matt's bio that he had sent. I'm not going to do that because part of Matt's talk is actually hopefully he will take us through some of the roads taken to where he is today. And so again, Professor Matt Parker, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along, and I'll try to draw Matt's attention to it at the end. You have control over your microphones and cameras, so feel free to interact with the guest as you normally would. If we were all in a collaboration space, and maybe soon, variants permitting. With that, Matt, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great intro. I do want to, sort of highlight that this is an informal talk, and I do appreciate you all making the time for this and fitting it into your schedule. I'm really pleased to be speaking with you. And so, if you have the question that you feel like is timely, or you want to jump in the middle of something, I'm happy to answer questions as we go. Don't feel like you have to stand on ceremony and let me talk the whole time. If they were in person, I would encourage you to raise your hand and I would talk to you in that setting. But let's try and do whatever the virtual equivalent of that is to the best of our ability while I'm doing this. So I'm just gonna pull up my presentation. Give me 1 second. Okay, everybody should be seeing that, right? Can I get?
Yeah, we got it. We got it.
Yeah.
Also, audience, feel free to use the emojis there, just so that Matt knows that he's not talking to just himself. It's always nice to have some interaction.
Yes, that would be nice. I want to. I'm more familiar with Zoom than I am with Teams, so if there's something I'm doing wrong or someone's trying to interject and I don't see it, or there's a thing in the chat, just feel free to chime in and talk to me or keep me from rambling so that I don't miss whatever comes up. So I do want to again iterate. Hopefully, this picture sort of makes it clear that I am. This isn't sort of for some sort of a formal talk. That this is an informal talk. So feel free to interject. So my name is Matt Parker. I am a professor, an associate professor of the arts at the NYU Game Center. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about what the Game Center is and how it works. So the NYU Game Center is technically, the title is we are in the Tisch School of the Arts, so we are an arts department. It is a design program. It's not a computer science program. It's not a technology program, although we obviously use lots of technology to make things like video games. But we see ourselves primarily as a place to design, as a place where people are creating works of art. We try to do our best to include our local community. So we have events like Playtest Thursday. It's not just about promoting games with our students and with our staff and faculty, but it's also about reaching out to our local audiences, to people who live nearby, getting them to come in and play our games and bring in their games to play too. Our mission is to get as many people in the space who want to be into the space and have them participating as broadly as possible. And we really try to raise all people who are trying to make games. We very much believe in the idea that the rising tide rises all boats. So we try very much to include public outside of just our students and people inside the school. So the department was created in 2007 and it became an official department in 2012. We had our first class of MFA students in 2014. I was actually an adjunct faculty before I was full-time faculty at the NYU Game Center, and we have been having classes of undergrad since 2015. So I'm not going to dwell on all the words on all these slides, but just to give sort of a brief overview of what we're at. We think games are an important part of culture. They're one of our oldest forms of culture. People often think of games as just video games, but we've had card games and play predates human existence. Animals play with each other, and it's just a part of society that is often sort of overlooked as an important part of our culture, but we think is one of our most important cultural forms. We think that we are very much a department of practice. We do have a good amount of game studies. We have a lot of observation and analysis of games, but primarily our focus is on making games, and we really believe the best way to learn how to make games is to make games. So we have our students making games from the very beginning of their time there. We also try to teach them about the history of games and sort of give an overview of what is going on currently in games, but we really believe that in the studio approach, having people build games, make games, we respond and critique them, help them get better through the process of doing. We also believe that games are not just digital games. We have lots of students who come in and who are trying to make card games or board games or new sports. We have a class called Games of One, which historically has been sort of an art history survey, but of games instead of art. And we talk about sort of the different genres of games every week. And I do the talk about sports because I think sports are games. Not all of our students always agree with that, but I think by the end of the lecture, those who are more skeptical tend to see a little bit more interest in games, even if they came in just being solely focused on video games. We offer a variety of classes. This is actually a somewhat dated version of our list of classes. We actually have a lot more of these classes. Some of these classes don't run anymore. This is just for our undergrads. We also have a different version of these classes for our master's students as well. But we have students who are majors, minors, and masters of game design as part of our department. So if there are any students observing who would like to try to get a master's after they finish at Waterloo, let me know. We can talk about it. As I said before, we try to have a lot of events that are for the public and try to include people outside of our department. We really are trying to develop the support and belief around games being an important cultural form and an important part of our society. Many of our students have gone on to have very successful games that have won awards and received broad press and been financially successful. My personal interest, though, I work a lot. So the intro, I was mentioned that I head up something called special projects at the NYU Game Center. I have a strong belief that games can be a way to explain and connect with people about things that otherwise people have difficulty connecting with. And so we've worked with a lot of external partners. A lot of my own professional work is working with external partners where we try to connect them with outside institutions or companies to try to work with them around games, primarily around nonprofits, but we also work with corporations as well. We have a series of designing for classes that I teach. The most popular one being a class called Designing for Museums, where we partnered with the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the American Museum of Natural History, two of the sort of preeminent museums in New York City and I guess in the world, I would say. And students design different games that fit the needs of the museum. And it's also a way to get students thinking about designing beyond just for entertainment. That gives them the opportunity to sort of have a easy transition into client work, which is a lot of the sort of game design that I do and a lot of that our faculty has done, making games for a purpose beyond just entertainment. Not that there's anything wrong with games that are just for entertainment. I love games that are just for entertainment, but we want to open their eyes to the possibilities of being able to do other things as well with games. And so these are some of the games and some of the work. This is showing some work at the museum. This is actually the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I believe. All these images, maybe all these images. Us doing different works where people were exploring different ways to be playful and have game-like interfaces with art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We've also worked at the Museum of Natural History, as I said before. We work with corporations like ESPN, but also we've done work with places like the Anti-Defamation League and iCivics, where we worked with local high schools, trying to work with local teenagers to try to figure out ways that we can make learning about civics, learning about American politics and American government and how it works, fun for them. So we also try to offer some of those things as sort of an extracurricular thing, where we have some honorariums that we pay students to sort of work professionally on projects while they still have supervision from staff and faculty at the Game Center to give them some exposure and some insight into what it is like to work in this world while they still have somewhat of a safety net, that structure provided by the school while they're still in school. So the reason why this sort of games is very interesting to me is that it's the sort of games that I generally work on. I realize I'm not in presentation mode, so I'll just run some of these. So I make games that are silly smartphone games. I make games for Xbox. I've made games for iPad. I've done a bunch of purely entertainment, fun sort of games. But I also do work that very much exists outside of the game space. So this is a project. Oh, are you hearing that? You're not hearing that, probably. I'm going to turn the volume. It's a little loud for me, but you are probably not hearing it because I'm not sharing sound.
We can hear it, Matt.
Oh, you can hear it. Okay, good. Then I'm glad I turned down the volume. Thank you. This is Dynamic Wall. It is 128 giant metal slats that have a motorized mover at the top and the bottom. I did not build the wall itself. I had developed the program that actually made it run and runs different mathematical formulas through it so that you can visualize those formulas and really feel what they are like in the real world. This is at the Museum of Math, which is in Midtown in New York City. So as I said, a lot of my work is sort of in that space and working on sort of developing these things. And this isn't a game per se, but I kind of don't draw a very thick line between games and sort of creative technology and entertainment of that type. I've also worked on sort of new media art stuff. Oh, that's loud. Sorry about that. This is Lumarca, a project I've been working on for a number of years. This actually started off as my master's thesis project with the collaboration with Albert Huang. This is a 3D visualizer that you can sort of see 3D shapes and imagery in the real world without special glasses or VR. It's a lo-fi interactive volumetric light structure, like sculpture. And basically it has a bunch of yarn and you perfectly align that yarn in a a very specific format so that it matches a model inside of the computer, and then you can project different light onto the different strings. And you can make 3D shapes and imagery that moves in the real world. And this is me showing it at the New Zealand Festival in Wellington, New Zealand, unsurprisingly, I guess. I've also shown it at various places around the world, and sometimes we make them really big. This is actually an earlier version that we did in Guadalajara, Mexico. This is the largest one we ever did. This is at the Monitor Digital Festival back in 2012. This is my, at the time, girlfriend, now wife, there for scale to show how large this structure actually was. This was a lot of work, but it was worth it because we believe this is the world's largest volumetric display ever made. This is it's like 10 meters by 10 meters by 10 meters. So 10 by 10 by 8 meters, I think, is actually what the light ended up encompassing. So I think it was about 8 tall and then 10 wide and 10 deep. We built this little tunnel into the middle of it. We weren't sure what we were going to do with it. This is one of the most satisfying things I've had as an artist. The security guards figured out a way to like set up a queuing system where people would come in and then they would like invite them to lie down and look up into it. And when you looked up into it, it sort of took up your whole field of view, and these sort of light formations that happened above you felt like embodied and physical and real. And there's a wave pattern that's going to come up in a second. I really felt like you almost felt like the world was moving just by this light moving, the way this sort of wave was coming crashing down on you, just this wave of light. This is it. And then there's another one that's sort of similar coming up in a second. But it was really gratifying that, the security in this building came up with a way that people could experience this safely without us having to worry about them destroying the art. And it was really satisfying. One of the highlights of my artistic career. But there is some competition. So I also worked at a company called Gigantic Mechanic, and we worked on something called the Senate Immersion Module. And now I'm glad this sound's going to work. So this is Barack Obama while he was still president of the United States at the opening of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. And this is the sim. Basically, it was a 100-person live-action role-playing project that we built in the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, where 100 high school students would come in, although sometimes it was not high school students, sometimes it was middle school students, sometimes it was ambassadors or military leaders, and they were all assigned different roles of different senators. So you're the Republican from Montana, you're the Democrat from Delaware, and we had different modules that we would run them through about different issues, and they would have a tablet that sort of acted as their chief of staff, telling them what their party wanted, what their state wanted. They can incorporate their own personal feelings and objectives, and there was like a 3-hour interactive experience where they had to act as senators, and they had facilitators that sort of pushed them through it. But by the end of it, they honestly didn't need as much facilitating. And then it sort of culminates in a big vote where they decide whether or not to pass or not pass this giant omnibus bill that they built through the process of these discussions that they've had over the 3 hours. I also do a lot of organizing, sort of festivals and conferences and things like that. I've worked a lot with the Come Out and Play Festival, which is a big games, big as in running outdoor field games, street games, not as in MMORPGs. more like physical games that people are running around in space, sometimes new sports, sometimes technology driven, often not technology driven. I've worked a lot with the Games for a Change Festival, having curated tracks for them multiple years and serving as the overall curator for 1 year. I was the founding chair for Indicate East and ran that festival for the first 3 years. And so all this is sort of to give you sort of a background to who I am, because as talking to Neil the other day about this, I have long been a sort of climate change doomsday guy, and that really came to a head sometime in mid-November 2016. I really started to fear for the health of the planet and realized that I couldn't rely on the powers that be to take care of it. So I decided that I had to try and do more. And part of that is because at the time my wife was pregnant with this guy. This is my son Wiley. He's now much bigger than this, but still cute. Maybe not quite as cute as this, but he's able to do more now, so it evens out. And you start seeing things about how much danger the world is in from various different sources. It made me feel like I had to do something about it. And so I've done all these things where I've made games and projects to educate people, to have an impact on what people do. I've done these classes where I've been trying to help out people with their missions. I've decided that I should do something myself to try to further fighting climate change. I thought that was sort of the most important issue to me and of our time, and I wanted to put some of my thoughts and professional skills towards that. And I do believe that entertainment has a role in that. I don't think, a lot of people will think like making games about a topic trivializes it, and that is very much not my belief, any more so than having athletes talk about politics. I think is important. I think having media has been proven to, whether that goes back to novels, the printed word, movies, TV shows. It is important that we make media about the things that we care about, and that we attempt to explain to people why they are important and what they can do to impact them. And I don't think games are any different from that. And that doesn't just cover the sort of games that are partnered with some sort of institution that is dedicated to that cause. I think there's a lot of games out there that people have made that weren't made specifically to with an organization or a nonprofit or NGO, but tell a story and sort of raise awareness of an issue and make people connect with that issue and still be a successful piece of commercial entertainment. That's a little bit of my soapbox talk about about games having impact. But this is just a funny quote. This is from Jack Handy back in the SNL days. It's Deep Thoughts. To me, it's sort of it highlights the way that we normally think about things, that we, I'll just read it. I can picture in my mind a world without war, a world without hate. And I can picture us attacking that world because they'd never expect it. It's sort of funny that there's so much we can work together to do negatively, and we often think about things that way. But I think if we work together, we can have more of a positive input than we sometimes realize. And I think one of the problems we have with things specifically around climate change is that our reach has exceeded our grasp, and not necessarily in a good way, that we are able to affect things without quite understanding the impact the things we're doing have, and that each one of us, if we're doing something ourselves, that we are not realize what that sort of adds up to. And I think there have been forces that have tried to keep us ignorant to what what our each individual actions are contributing to, and try to hide their responsibility for doing that. So I strongly believe that the best way to fight climate change is together, and that we need to work together to have an impact on this. We need to, climate change is sort of a problem of collective neglect, and the only solution for collective neglect is collective action. While I don't think people should blame themselves individually for climate change, because I think climate change is largely responsible as a top-down problem that the top corporations that are part of it have tried to convince us are due to our individual behaviors, when it is in fact their fault. I think in order to make those companies and governments do the correct thing, we have to work together to push on them. And so back in 2018, I co-founded the OpenAir Collective, which is a volunteer collective specifically about carbon removal. To clarify for those of you who might not be familiar with carbon removal is basically cleaning up our garbage. It is not carbon capture, which it often gets confused with. Carbon capture can be good, can be not good, depends on what you're doing with it, but it's the act of reducing emissions by trying to capture some of the CO2 that you're generating from current burning of fossil fuels. Carbon removal is about taking emissions that have already gone out into the ambient environment, whether that's the air or the sea or soil, and finding ways to lock it away long term. The analogy we often use for it is it's kind of like an oil spill in the sky. We've been spilling, if you have like an oil spill in a bay, you don't just turn off the valve that's leaking oil and leave all the oil sitting in the bay. You tend to clean up the oil that's already spilled into the natural environment there. Reducing emissions is turning off the valve. And we should do that 100%. We should try to eliminate new emissions as quickly and thoroughly as possible. But we should also clean up the emissions that we put into the air in the past. And that's what carbon removal is, finding ways to take carbon, CO2, out of our ambient environment and lock it away, sequester it for decades, centuries, millennia. And that's what OpenAir is really about and about promoting. And we do that with three different things. One of them is we do R&D. We actually are trying to develop and have successfully developed some open source hardware direct air carbon capture machines, which are machines that take CO2 out of the ambient air so that it can be stored away long term. This is obviously, these pictures are pre-COVID, sadly. We also do a lot of policy. We've gotten a bunch of bills introduced in the US, and we're working to do that in Canada as well. So if anyone's interested in looking at some of our legislation and finding ways to introduce it in Canada, please come talk to me. We also do it through awareness. We have a series called This is CDR, where we explain carbon dioxide removal. And we have different experts in that space come in and talk every week about different technologies or approaches or policy that can sort of advance carbon removal. And this is part of our sort of awareness pillar, I guess I would say, category. This feels pretty far from games, except, awareness is something that games do really well. This is a early prototype of something, an interactive that I made in Unity to sort of show how direct air carbon capture machines work. So this, you can see this sort of orange-red air coming in with CO2 molecules on it. It passes through these sorbents, these panels of sorbents that absorb CO2. And the air comes out with less CO2. This model has been updated to show more of the details of what happens, but these carbon removal devices are not as sci-fi as they sound, especially to people who are not steeped in the technology. They're basically dehumidifiers, but instead of removing humidity from the air, they remove CO2. And so trying to demystify that, make it seem like a normal thing that we can do, as part of the mission of OpenAir. And we have and one of our members is a former Navy submarine officer who talks about how, the reason we are able to have large groups of people live under the ocean for months at a time is because we know how to remove CO2 from air. We've been doing this for over 100 years. Now we just need to figure out how to do it on a larger scale throughout our environment instead of in tiny tubes under the water, or we've done it in space as well. That's how astronauts are able to breathe. So we have the technology. We just need to adapt that technology to work in our ambient environment. And the way we do that at OpenAir is through volunteer contributions. So I started off making this. You may notice that it kind of looks like our logo. Our logo is based off of this sort of interactive that I made. We've had a bunch of graphic designers come in, and they volunteer their time. People who want to fight climate change by doing what they do well professionally, that is sort of the heart of OpenAir, and that's what I do. So I'm a game designer. I make games, and so I have been trying to, and hopefully I feel successfully, trying to incorporate what I know about building communities. So all the stuff I talked about, festivals and conferences, that's a lot of what I do with OpenAir, is trying to figure out how to build a community around people fighting climate change, make people feel gratified and rewarded by it. Working with external clients. I do a lot of stuff where we work with different organizations like Carbon Gap, which is a advocacy group in Europe that is working on getting carbon removal legislation introduced in Europe. Carbon 180 does the same thing sort of in the US. And so finding ways to partner with them and help spread their message and popularize what they're doing is related to a lot of what I've done professionally in the past. And so as part of this, we took a contingent of OpenAir people, went to the UN Climate Conference, COP26 in Glasgow at the beginning of November. This is me there. Sorry if there's Raptors fans in the audience. I'm a Nets fan. We can discuss that later. I think there's not much argument this year, but we can. You've definitely had overall success in recent years that can't be denied. I got to meet Greta. That was pretty cool. Just a random happening. She was like behind me in line to get through security. But really the reason we were there is to meet people, to talk about our message, to recruit people to try and spread the word about carbon removal. So we showed in the green zone at COP26. We had a little booth there where we were showing a game that I had developed called Carbon Collector that was about how carbon removal fits into the overall process of fighting climate change, what the solution is and what it is not, and what the different factors are that go into it. And so when you're making a game, obviously, especially if you're making a game for a conference where you have people for maybe 5 minutes, you have to sort of simplify the mechanics and the interfaces for it. You can't have a big wall of text that people are required to read before they interact with it. So we built a game that, so it was at the Green Zone. It was also at the University of Glasgow. They had a climate change sustainability solutions showcase that we participated in. And we built this game so that you could play it on your smartphone. So you go to a URL, you scan this QR code that's on the screen there, or you type in the URL yourself, and then you are able to vote on what people should do in terms of how to fight climate change, and what to put our resources into for fighting that. And it worked really well. It was really successful. People were very happy with it. At times the internet was a little spotty, which made for some issues for a game that was being controlled through people's phones, through like a mobile web page that people were connecting with the game. But we had backup plans for a non-web version of that worked pretty well. It was really effective, and part of why I'm happy to talk to you today is it was so effective there that we want to adapt that game and bring it to an online space, put it on our website so that we can send it to people and have people interact with it. But there's a big difference between a game that works with somebody there facilitating it and like explaining each part of it as people are playing it and sort of walking them through it, and something that has to live on its own on a web page where people will encounter it on their own and have to understand how to interact with it, but still probably only have their attention for a limited time. So with that said, live demo time. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second. And while I'm bringing up the other thing, if there's any questions or concerns that have come up in the meantime.
I haven't seen any questions come up as yet, but Stuart reacted with both laughing and sad faces to
Which part?
those semi-inspirational quotes. I agree with him on that one.
I have
a
question, if that's okay. I
Please.
can turn on my camera so you can see me too.
Yeah, great.
It's like not that you're talking into it. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so I was worried about asking this because I don't want to seem rude or anything.
Be rude. I mean, don't be awful, but
No,
ask your question.
I'm genuinely curious. So, you said that you were working on the carbon collector, but also on legislation. And my question was, would one interfere with the other? Because when you think about it, like, yes, the big companies are most of the problem. And with something like a carbon collector, do you think that that would give them the opening and I guess like the opportunity to argue for their current patterns? Because, you know, you're helping clean things up, but that's also like, you know, so there
This
might be
is
more almost pushback against the I don't know if that makes sense, but
this is the we get this a lot. This is the moral hazard argument that we've heard many times. Sort of my first response to the moral hazard argument is you could argue that carbon removal would be harmful, like would push against reducing emissions if we were in fact reducing emissions. The fact is, like, we have not, like, our emissions have increased over the past 20 years. Every year, basically, emissions, except for with the exception of the first COVID year, but they've gotten back up there. So it's not like emissions are going down and we don't have carbon removal at scale now. So the argument that carbon removal will make it so that we'll stop the progress that we're making is, I would say, have not made that much progress yet. The other argument I would say is that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if we had really taken climate change seriously and stepped down, we could have maybe survived without carbon removal. But at this point, it's just a necessity. We already have too much CO2 in our atmosphere. Even if we magically somehow tomorrow stopped releasing CO2 into our ambient air, there's still too much in the ambient air, and we need to remove. We're currently at around, depending on how you look at it, somewhere around 415 to 420 parts per million CO2 in our atmosphere. There's an organization called 350.org, and basically it's 350 because they think our parts per million should be at 350 parts per million, not 420 parts per million. We're on pace to get to 450 parts per million in the not too distant future. The IPCC report in 2018, and this is part of what drove me to embrace carbon removal when I had some skepticism about it myself back then. The UN climate report, the IPCC report in 2018 started saying, like, we are going to need carbon removal at scale because we've already put too much CO2 in our atmosphere. And every year since, they have increased we need this more and more all the time because we're not meeting our climate goals. And even if we meet our climate goals in terms of reducing emissions, those are not aggressive enough to keep us below 1.5 C without carbon removal. They're not even enough to keep us below 2 degrees C without carbon removal. And, if we're being completely honest about it, I don't think we're going to stay under 1.5 C even with carbon removal. I don't think we're going to stay under 2 C with carbon removal. But with carbon removal, there's a chance we'll go over it and then come back down. And without it, you just stay up there. You're just stuck up there forever. Things just keep getting hotter and hotter without carbon removal at scale. So I think at this point, the ship has sort of sailed. Carbon removal needs to be part of the solution. This is why we always try to make it very clear that we're not like shills for the the oil and gas industry or something like that. We're not for keeping burning coal. We think we have to stop burning fossil fuels as quickly and completely as possible, but even with that, we need carbon removal on top of it. So I think there's a false dichotomy gets set up sometimes that it's like carbon removal versus reducing emissions. And so hopefully this game will demonstrate why we don't believe that's the case. It's like the perfect question because it segues perfectly into the game.
Before you got there, Matt, I do see a couple more people have their hands up. Robert and Katarina, are your questions, can they wait for or are they very much related to what was said? I don't want to disrupt.
I think they can wait. Mine can wait.
Yours can wait, Robert. Thank you very much. Kat?
It's kind of related, but
go ahead. If it's related, absolutely go ahead.
Yeah.
And Robert, I'll circle back to you later.
I was just wondering, and I also don't want to be rude, but why choose like a project like carbon removal instead of like other types of movements?
Yeah, I
Like-
think that's a totally fair question. And also, apparently rude around here does not mean this. I'm from New York, so rude means maybe something else. But yeah, I don't think these questions are rude. So personally, what I wanted to get out of spending my time and energy to volunteer in climate change was I wanted to, when I spent a long time looking for something to join. I did not want to start my own thing. It was never my desire or goal to create something new. I was looking for someone to join that I could contribute to. And even now, when I look around at what people offer when they say, like, well, what can I do as an individual to fight climate change? You're given, you can recycle, compost, turn your lights out more, which I don't know how sensitive we are to profanity here on this call. So I'll just say I think are bullpucky. I think that's like, yeah, we should do all those things. I obsessively do all those things already. That's not having enough impact. And then you should vote. You should go to marches. I always felt like marches, I was like a seat filler at the Oscars. I was like, all I did was contribute to the total number of people there. It had nothing to do with me or who I was as an individual and what I could contribute, what my skills and abilities were. So when we started OpenAir, it was really with the goal of how do we maximize people's impact for effort? And so there's a lot of people already working on reducing emissions in a lot of different places. There's a lot of fighting around that. There's a lot of conflict around that. And carbon removal was something that we thought we could have an outsized impact for effort. So our first piece of legislation, the New York State Low Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act, LECLA, as it's colloquially known, and we got that introduced with like 3 people and passed with like 5 people. We reached out to other organizations. Like we were able to get a major piece of legislation passed in New York State with not a lot of people, with not a lot of like a limited number of volunteers contributing to that. And the success of that led there to being a similar bill be introduced in New Jersey. And that bill in New Jersey and New York led to a similar bill being introduced in Virginia. We're working on bills in Wisconsin and California. Actually, California ended up passing a separate bill that was similar to our bill, but different in some ways on their own. Colorado, Oregon, and even part of the recent infrastructure bill that got passed in the U.S. Was directly influenced by the policy that we got introduced in New York State to begin with. So we really believe in like, you start off, you pick a smaller location, a smaller locality, you get something introduced there, you use it as a proof of concept to spread it elsewhere. Then once it spreads to other places, you can get more people involved in working on it. And so carbon removal was something that was absolutely required, again, but not something that was having as much support or focus on it as some of the other climate solutions. And so we thought we could give people an opportunity to have an outsized impact on fighting climate change by focusing on that.
Okay. I think I do kind of have like follow-up questions
Sure.
and things, but I think it's better to leave it to maybe like after the talk
Okay.
kind of thing, like if it was like more of a discussion related.
Sure. Yeah.
If
So
that's okay.
we're going to look at the game real quick now, and we can talk while the game is being played or after the game is played.
Go ahead, Matt. Robert, I'll circle back to you, and I have 2 other questions later on in the chat.
So this is Carbon Collector. This is a game about. So I've turned off the phone component of it. We're just going to play it as, and I want people to yell out numbers, I guess. But it's a game about emissions effort and removal, and it sort of talks about how what we have to do in order to stay under 1.5C, which again I think is more of an aspirational goal than a goal that we will actually achieve. But hopefully I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. So basically the game starts, and you have 3 sliders that you can choose to vote on. Again, we wanted to make this a simple game that people could interact with. Don't bother going to this URL or scanning this this ID, because we're going to be playing. This is kind of a step towards what the web build is going to be. So you can see we've got these little people walking around down here. We've got these factories that are going to emit a lot of emissions, and they're going to fill up this balloon. We've got a carbon budget, so basically we can release 400 gigatons before we go over 1.5 C. So we're going to try and stay under this budget. If we go over 400 gigatons, you lose the game. And so if this balloon gets too full, gets too big, this will get over 400 and game over. And we have a little carbon removal device here that at the beginning is not going to be very effective at removing carbon. And so what you're basically deciding on is, do you want to focus your, there's these 3 sliders. When I move one up, the other 2 move down. If I move down, the other 2 move up. So we have to balance. There's only so much energy that humanity has to put in these things. So you're sort of playing as the person who controls what humanity focuses on. So do you want to focus on reducing emissions, which is this red slider? Do you want to focus on increasing carbon removal, or do you want to focus on increasing the number of people who are putting effort into these things? And that acts as a multiplier for these first 2. So if we put a lot of stuff into the effort multiplier, that will help reduce emissions and removal in the future, but it won't help anything this round. And so each one is 3 years, so we're charting in 2021. I'm going to just do the first round because we're running low on time here. So I'm gonna focus on getting more people involved. Okay, let's just start with that, and I will submit. And you'll see these things start emitting smoke. Our balloon's getting bigger as we're losing more carbon, and we're removing a little bit of CO2, not a lot, but we've got more people working on the problem, having good ideas. We got business people and activists and scientists working on, so the little suits are like elected officials or business people. People in the t-shirts are activists. They're randomly generated, so we might not have gotten any scientists this time randomly, but maybe we'll get some scientists in the future. So now I'm going to leave it to you. What do people think we should do? Somebody yell out what they think we should focus on in the next 3 years. We're in the year 2024. We've already used up 100 gigatons of our 400 budget in just 3 years. What should we do now? Do people want to focus on reducing emissions, increasing removal, or increasing the effort multiplier?
I want to increase removal and see what happens.
How high do you want to put it? Give me a percentage. 50% on removal, 25, 75,
25,
35?
25. Yeah, 35.
Right there. Okay. Do you want to keep emissions where they are? Or this emissions reduction level look good to you? Oh,
No,
yep.
just keep it the same. Keep the same.
I'm glad you said that because we ran out of time. This is geared towards like getting people quickly through at a conference. So, all right, we reduced emissions a little bit. We're down to 30 gigatons a year. Our carbon removal is next to them. This is 0.01 megatons. So this isn't even at gigaton scale yet. This is very small. And in order to win this game, we need removal to be more than emissions. So right now we're at 30 gigatons of emissions, and we're at removal of 0.01 megatons. So we're always going to be emitting, until we get this number lower than this number, we're emitting more than we're removing. There's a maximum of how much we can remove, which is 10 gigatons, and there's a minimum of how we can emit, which is 5 gigatons. Because there's always going to be bad actors out there, people we can't control, people burning more carbon, going into the future. So we need to be able to remove more than they're going to emit, even if everybody else is on the right page. So what do people want to do this round? We got about a little over a minute left. We can increase emissions. We can increase removal.
Jen Rickard suggested reducing emissions in the chat.
Reducing emissions, what percentage?
Jen?
I don't know, 2% more, question mark.
2%, okay, so that's like that, maybe? Does that look good to everybody? Anyone want to change it? We got 40 seconds left. We're in the year 2027. We've already used up about half our carbon budget.
Can you include the effort multiplier? Can you like double it?
Put it like all the way up here? Sure, but that'll reduce the other two. I'm happy to do that if that's what you want to do. Just make it
No. It's like 1.5 points forward.
Oh, like this?
More.
Like here?
No, less.
Here.
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, So our effort multiplier is going up. You can see it increasing every year. We're in the year 2029, 2030. It's not looking great. We're at 279. Our effort multiplier is 2.83, so that has increased the amount that we can reduce emissions every year and increase removal every year. We're down to 25 gigatons, which if this, hopefully we can get there. You can see some of these factories are starting to turn into wind turbines, so they're not emitting emissions anymore. So what do we want to do this year? We've got a lot more people down here. We got some scientists now. I see some lab coats down there. They're having some ideas, thinking of things we could do. Our removal is still very, very low, 0.06. Our emissions are still way too high. What do we want to do?
So if you hike up removal by, say, 20%.
Sure, 20% to like here. Does that look good?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you want to change emissions or effort at all, or you want to leave them where they are?
Let's try lowering emissions by, I don't know, 5% or 10%. Yeah.
Down to like there?
Sure.
Okay. Anyone else want to make any tweaks?
No, let's see what that does.
Yeah, let's see it. All right. This balloon's getting pretty big. We're at 324.
Ouch.
Yeah, still emitting a lot. But our removal has gone up significantly. We're up to 1.14. We're almost to gigaton scale. We're not quite there, but we're getting closer. Our effort multiplier is 3.45, so we can do about 3.5 times more reducing emissions or increasing removal than we could at the start. So that's good. But we're running out of time because it's 2033 and we've only got about 50 gigatons left. And we're emitting 23 gigatons a year. So what do people want to do now?
Sit down and cry.
Yeah, it's not a bad move. Seems reasonable.
Well, Stuart is suggesting another removal. Alex, cut emissions as much as possible, raise removal as much as possible.
Well, so
there's another, Alexander Glover also is suggesting pump all into reducing emissions.
All into reducing emissions, like 100%. You want to try it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. All right, so emissions are dropping dramatically. We are down to, let's see, I think we may have hit our floor now. We're down to, not quite, we're at 9.4 gigatons, which is a remarkable decrease from we started around 35 gigatons. The good news is we're down to like less than 10 gigatons being emitted every year. The bad news is that we've only got 13 gigatons left before we cross that 1.5 C. So what do we want to do now? We've made it to the year 2036. That's good. People don't always last that long.
Alex Fleck is suggesting cut emissions as much as possible, raise removal as much as possible.
Well, so those two things, we have to decide which one we're going to invest in. Alex, what do you want to do?
Say that again? No, light blue. Oh, so that's effort multiplier.
Yeah, that's going to increase how much we can do per year of these two things. But it's not going to actually do it those years. It's just getting more people to work on the problem for the future. We got a lot of people down here working on it.
Well, let's hike up that multiplier then.
Hike it up. How high? All the way? 80%? 50%?
Oh, that kills removal. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
okay.
When you move one slider up, the others go down.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest put removal at around 25% and put the rest of it into, put emissions into 25% since we are nearly at our floor anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And then put the rest into removal since more effort for the future isn't going to help for the immediate because we're now at the immediate stage.
Okay, let's do that. All right, so that looks about right. All right, let's try it. Okay, so we're down to, oh no, our balloon popped. we did get to gigaton scale just barely at the end there. We got down to 8.36 in terms of emissions removal, but we didn't quite get there. I will say this is a game that basically nobody wins the first time. That's kind of by design. So I guess we're at time. I don't know how long I'm supposed to talk for.
I think we can safely go for a few more minutes because we have some questions. So Robert, I promised to circle back to you with the first question, and then there are questions in the chat. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so I had a question that if I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit. Like, so one thing that in the game and also from the talk, in general, I find people misunderstand about carbon capture is that it takes energy. Is that it's actually quite energy intensive. Like the reason why a submarine can do it, it has a nuclear reactor on board.
Sure. I would argue we should build more nuclear reactors in other places to get more of our energy. But
yeah, so I'm wondering how do you represent where the energy for carbon capture is meant to come from in the in your, I guess, the advocacy work and also in like the game and things like that.
So the first thing I want to do is I want to clarify we're carbon removal, not carbon capture, which is
sorry, carbon removal. Sorry.
Yeah, not your fault. It's the fault of bad naming conventions that almost everybody makes that mistake when they are talking about the space if they're not like super embedded in it because the words seem interchangeable. But carbon capture is largely about like point source capture, so catching flue gas from a coal plant, for example. If you're catching CO2 being emitted there, that would be carbon capture. Carbon removal is from the ambient air. So that's the sort of main difference. And then there's also whether or not you're using that CO2 to make short-term things with it or release it again, or you're locking it away. So those are the big distinctions between carbon removal and carbon capture. I think there's a bunch of problems with carbon removal right now. If we just like took what we did now and didn't try to make it better at all and just try to increase it, we would not be in good shape. That would not actually help the problem much. It is energy intensive. It is expensive. It's not that efficient. But the same arguments were the exact same arguments were made about solar 20 years ago. That solar was a false solution for climate change because those exact same things. It wasn't efficient. It was too expensive. The resources that it took to make solar panels were harmful to the environment. It took energy to produce those. But there's been sort of an exponential increase in how valuable solar is along all those things. So we're definitely not making the argument that carbon removal is a silver bullet or able to solve things or even will ever get there. But if we don't start investing in it now and start working on improving it and making it better now, making it more energy efficient, making it more cost effective, we need that same sort of success that we saw in solar to happen with carbon removal.
Oh, sorry. I think maybe I didn't represent my question well. I'm not disputing any of that. I'm asking more in terms of like because of the fact that we're dealing with a complex system. Is there any discussion of like, does this need its own energy grid? Are we talking about like it needing almost a dedicated industry built to handle it, or that has its like own reactor set or something like that, or its own solar panel farms in certain spots that are catered to that, or does it need to be more something that's integrated into the existing infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is that we don't know quite yet. I think the largest carbon removal device, a direct air carbon capture plant in Iceland, one of the advantages of it is that it can be done in places where people don't live or don't want to live. That it basically the air is everywhere, and you remove CO2 from the air one place, that sort of like evens out around the globe over time. So it can be done in places that it doesn't have to be co-located where people live. So you can build dedicated energy that's not taking energy away from other things. The plant in Iceland is actually using geothermal energy, so it's not producing additional emissions. But I think the energy sector overall needs to be decarbonized, as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. And when that's the case, again, it's something that this has to happen. So we have to figure out how to work it into our current energy and our future energy crisis situation, because we have garbage trucks. We understand that we have to clean up our trash. When it comes to like physical trash, we need to think about emissions in the same way.
Thanks. Matt. Thanks, Robert. The next question I have, Matt, is from Amerlyle, who says, I find that games are different from simulation because they can be designed with intent. This helps driving home a message as opposed to being taken out of context, creating a proper narrative. Would you say that is an appropriate perspective?
I would argue that simulations also have bias most of the time based on who created them. I would say we have never tried to frame this game as a simulation. And I do think ideally a simulation would try to remove those biases or internal thought. But I think as people, we're just not capable of not having that be part of our process, and our own sort of internal perspectives affect how we design systems. So I think I guess I would agree, at least in that games, I think, are more honest about what they're doing there. And at least not aspiring to do what simulations are aspiring to do, which I feel like, some simulations I'm sure do it better than others, but I think they're often fraught.
Thank you. Another question from Katya. This perhaps relates to Katarina's earlier question. Can you talk a bit about reducing emissions via planting trees specifically? I thought for a long time this was a great approach, but have recently read criticism about its scalability. How does it compare to carbon removal?
It's a great question. I think we should plant as many trees as we possibly can. But if we cover the entire planet, every inch of soil we have with trees, it's not enough to remove enough carbon to, even again, if we stop emissions, there are people who run the math on this. There's not enough land for us to cover it with enough trees, for us to remove enough CO2, for us to be able to avoid the worst case scenario. So I think natural solutions like trees are 100% part of the solution. We should be doing as much of it as possible, but we can't rely on that without assisting it. There's a lot of people who I think create a false dichotomy between natural solutions and technology-driven solutions, and think that we should only be doing natural solutions. We didn't create this problem through nature. We created it through technology. And I think we need to work on making technology that solves the problem that technology created. Some people would argue you can't solve a problem with the thing that created it, but I might argue you could only solve a problem with the thing that created it. We need to help nature. I think nature has already been getting beat up a lot by what we've done so far, and doing its best to try to counteract what humanity has done. We need to try to do our best to assist nature in fixing things, because the fact of the matter is that carbon removal machines can remove orders of magnitude more per square foot than natural solutions can, because that's not what trees were made to do. That's not what their job is, and we're trying to make them do a job that it's really our job to clean up. So we need to help them. But we should absolutely plant as many trees as we can. We should do as much reforestation, stop deforestation as quickly as we can, but we need to do more than that.
So a related question from Alex Glover asks, what is the relative space requirement of a carbon removal device? How large to reach gigaton scale?
It's a great question. I think, again, the answer is right now it would be better than trees, but too large. I don't actually know what the square footage is. So if you're curious about this, Project Orca is the name of the carbon removal plant that was opened in Iceland. It's removing 4,000 tons of CO2 a year from the ambient air, which is a nice start. It's good. It's better than where we were before, but it's way short of where it needs to be and where we need to be. Again, the answer is if we just built it off of what the current standards are, or what the current technology is capable of, we are not going to be very effective. It's not going to be enough. So it's less about where we're at now, and it's more about figuring out how we can get to a better place. So I don't have the exact numbers of how much land coverage we'd have to do with carbon removal machines. Now, I can tell you now that they're much more effective than trees are, but they're not effective enough that I would suspect that even if we cover the whole planet, well, maybe we cover the whole planet with carbon removal machines, we'd be okay, but I don't think we want to do that or can do that.
Right. I have 2 more questions from the chat, and then we'll go to Kat and Emma. They have their hands up. So those are 2 questions related specifically to the game. And by the way, you're still projecting your screen.
Sure.
In case
I can stop.
you don't know that. No, it's fine if you want to. Just wanted to make sure mention. So the first question then from Amaralt about the game says, so the strategy in the game is to focus first on steadily increasing effort until removal per year exceeds emissions per year. And then the other one from Robert is, in the game, does locking the sliders to each other risk encouraging a false dichotomy?
So I think that we've discussed that and we talked about that. So I'll start with the second question first. That is why we put in the effort multiplier, because it kind of removes the false dichotomy part of it, right? So right now, there's only so many people who are working on climate change. Our hope, and part of the reason why we created OpenAir, is to give an opportunity for everyone. You don't have to have a job in climate change. You don't have to be somebody who studied climate change. You can be a game designer and you can work on climate change. You could be it's hard to think of a profession that would be less suited to work on climate change, or at least less obviously suited to work on it than game designer. We really want people to see and believe that no matter who they are, they can do something to have an impact on this. And that's really what OpenAir is about. So the way you get beyond that is by just saying, if we can get more people working on this, then it's yes, you literally a person can't do 2 things at once. But if you have more people, then you can have one person working on one thing and one person working on the other thing. So to get to the first question, yes, the key to the game is getting effort up quickly, early. Then, well, should I spoil the game? Should I say there is a way to win? People, like I said, nobody really wins the first time, but people have won after several iterations. So I'm not sure if I should show people the winning strategy, or, I mean, it'll probably be a while before we get a version of this online that you can play on your own. So I don't know. If people want to say in the chat whether or not they want to, I'll just at least start the first year right.
Okay. I'll leave that to the people's votes in the chat. But in the meantime, Kat, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna this is a follow up to what we talked about earlier. I noticed that one of the choices that you sort of listed out, that what we could personally do to sort of decrease emissions, didn't include changing our diet to going vegan. From my understanding, that the animal agriculture industry has a very huge impact on climate change.
It is substantial, but if everybody went vegan, we'd still be there would be no hope, I guess, is my take on it. I think yes, people in general, I'm going to talk about more than meat consumption, which I personally have. I'm not vegan, but I have greatly decreased my consumption of animal products as part of my overall approach. But that's not going to save us. It's if everybody goes 100% vegan, we're still in trouble. So there's a really good article in Business Insider about this recently, basically about how corporations started in as early as the 70s trying to convince people that environmentalism and climate change was their responsibility, not the responsibility of the ones actually making the problem, not the emissions. They encourage things like carpooling and turning off your lights. And recycling programs exist because corporations were worried that bans would come on plastics. And in order to make it so that they didn't have to stop making the plastics that they were using, they decided to encourage policy around making it individual responsibility for recycling those things, rather than, which is largely ineffective. Recycling is good, you should do it, but a lot of it ends up in our oceans or in the environment. A lot of it gets thrown out anyway. I think there was a really great article that I read. This is back in 2018, and the title was something like "The biggest lie we're told about climate change is that it's our fault." And so, yeah, I think people should take personal responsibility for what they do. The word carbon footprint, the term carbon footprint, came from corporations trying to convince people it was their fault that we were in the mess that we're in. I just think it's not. It's something we should do, but like if you think that is the main thing you're focusing on, then I think the corporations have done their job in distracting you to make you feel bad about climate change rather than take them on for what they're doing. There's a great stat that 70% of emissions come from 100 companies. I think we should focus on trying to force those 100 companies to change what they're doing. I think everyone should do whatever in their personal power to make things better, but I wouldn't say that should be our primary focus.
Thanks, Matt. I will ask Emma to ask her question. In the meantime, folks, there's a poll in the chat there on the game spoiler. So if you haven't voted yet, do so. Emma, go ahead.
That was like a hilariously good transition into my question between those two, because I guess hilariously, like I am a vegan, but I'm also an anti-capitalist because I think that it is not an individual problem. And as a cultural studies scholar, I do a lot of studying about discourse, and the discourse that is circulating is, as you've said, that this is an individual problem, that it falls on individuals, and that's what the corporations want us to believe, when really, without the profit motive, completely different paths could be taken. And so I guess my question is, thinking about games that have been made in the past, the McDonald's simulation game that specifically looked to raise awareness about McDonald's and deforestation, for example.
Paolo Peditici, great game designer, really, yeah. Friend
So
of mine.
I think that's like, that's what I think of as, I think what's effective about that game is that it's not just about wage labor and animal agriculture and a nameless, faceless company. It's about McDonald's. And I guess what I wonder is if you guys have discussed to sort of combat that discourse that it's about the individual carbon footprint, naming specific companies or including facts about these specific 100 companies who are really the drivers of climate change. So people don't walk away from your game being like, oh, I have to do better. I have to be part of this impact multiplier instead of, we need to stop these companies. Like, so that's the takeaway, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think, so again, 5-minute game at a conference. So yeah, I think we were trying to like, I was talking to someone about this the other day that, when you make an educational game, when you partner up with it, when we were working on the Senate immersion module, they were like, okay, what do you want this game to teach? And they had like, okay, here's like the book that we want. Here's the textbook we want people to learn from playing this game. We're like, pick 3 things. Like when you have people play a game, you can like hope that they will learn more, but you really have to like narrow in on like the beginning of knowledge, the things you can learn, and then hopefully they get to more things later. I'm just gonna tweak the thing with values while I'm talking here. So I think that is a good point, but really what we were going for with the like becoming one of these people is that you can be empowered, you can have an impact. Because I think honestly, part of what I felt when I first started working in this, and I think what a lot of people feel when they get exposed to this is hopeless, powerless, like they can't do anything. And I think in some ways saying like, it's these giant corporations' fault to make you feel like, well, I don't have any control over that giant corporation, so I guess there's nothing I can do. And so like a lot of what we're doing, especially with like the legislation stuff that we're working on is trying to make it so that, these companies are held accountable and have to try and find solutions or incentivize. So like part of, and some of them want to do this. So in the concrete thing, I think I mentioned earlier, the Low Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act, LECLA, there are companies that want to stop reducing, like concrete is a huge emitter of CO2. Most people don't know this. About 8% of global emissions come from the creation of concrete. That's like 4 times the aviation industry, like 4 times as much comes from the creation of concrete. And so like if you're like, you feel bad about taking a flight somewhere, think about how like every plane, if every plane was grounded, 4 times of that comes from the construction of concrete. So we're working, so that bill was try to get, there are new techniques where people can produce concrete, or corporations can produce concrete that is way less harmful to the environment, releases way fewer emissions, It's kind of dry and boring. This is why you have to make games to make people interested. Nobody's that interested in how concrete is made, but it's super important, it turns out. So you have to find ways to get people engaged and interested in it. Some of those companies want to do the right thing, but they don't have any financial incentive to do it, and they feel like they can't do it. Some of them are doing it anyway. We've actually, I totally understand being anti-capitalist, and I get it. But we have actually met some companies that are like already doing it, even though it's costing them profits to do it because they believe in it enough. But there are other companies that like they kind of want to do it, but they're not willing to lose money over doing it. And there's other companies that don't want to be doing it because we've been pouring concrete since ancient Rome, and if they think it ain't broke, so they don't want to fix it. And those ones you have to like incentivize. You have to give them a carrot or a stick to get them to do things. And LECLA in particular was more carrot than stick because it was introduced when Republicans controlled most of the government in the U.S. And so we figured, incentivizing businesses and saying like it's a way to upgrade your technology, and we're doing things in the more purple or reddish leaning states that we're trying to get LECLA passed in. Like Virginia just had a big shift to a more red state than it had previously been. We were like framing it as, hey, if you do this low embodied carbon concrete, it's you get tax breaks. Republicans love tax breaks. So I don't know. I have my ideologies. I have the things I believe. They'd say I'm a pretty far left-leaning person in general, but I also am a pragmatist at some level and want to. For me, like this sort of ties into like a lot of people. Like there are oil and gas companies that are invested in carbon removal. Most of them are more invested in carbon capture, but there are people who I know, not OpenAir, but people who I know who are very much in the carbon removal space who are funded by fossil fuel companies. And there's people who are just like, that makes you the bad guy if you're working with the fossil fuel companies. And I'm kind of like, honestly, can we just solve this? Like, I'm less about like punishing people about the sins of the past and more about like, let's not catch on fire. So, yeah, I in a perfect world, we would be able to solve this with just like angels on our side, but I just want it solved more than I want it solved the right. Like I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, that's always the case with complex systems, isn't it? But I will tell you that the question about the game spoiler is fairly straightforward. 73% are asking for the game spoiler. So 26% of you who voted no, cover your ears or something. But we apparently are ready for a game spoiler.
Well, I will say that I've been quietly doing the game spoiler as I've been talking without really hitting for the results of the poll, which maybe is bad form. But you can see that our emissions are down to 5 gigatons a year. So basically, you want to not close to max out, maybe not quite max out effort at the beginning. So you get as many people working on the problem as possible. Then you want to close to max out emissions reduction. So this is very much to like prove the point, like we can't get there without like attacking emissions as quickly as possible. And then once you've got emissions as low as you can think we go, and nobody knows what the actual floor is for what human emissions will be in the future. I think it's going to be hard to believe that like North Korea is going to stop burning coal, right? Like there are certain just like places that you just are never going to get on board with this. As much as we can like pressure different governments and like, we're not doing enough in the U.S. We're not doing, Canada's actually doing much better than the U.S., but not enough. Nobody's doing enough. But even if you feel like you can get almost everybody who you can get to do as much as they possibly can, there's still going to be some places that are still continue to emit CO2 even after things get worse than they are now, significantly worse than they are now, for a long time and maybe for forever. Until there's something cheaper than coal, someone's going to burn coal. Hopefully we can get that level down low enough that we can remove more than we're putting into the air. So yeah, you focus on effort at the beginning, then you pour that effort as much as almost completely into reducing emissions, and then when you hit that sort of floor of emissions, then, and you put a little bit into removal, and a little bit in removal goes a long way these days because there's very little in removal compared to these other things right now. And then you focus on removal once you've gotten emissions down below 10 gigatons, basically. Once you've gotten emissions, so removal maxes out at 10 gigatons. So you can't, so if you can get emissions below 10 gigatons and removal above 10 gigatons, then we've got net zero, which I know it's, some people find it a problematic term, but I just think it's what the reality of the world has to be, given that we can't control what everyone's doing. We can't even control what the quote unquote good guys are doing, so how are we going to control what the quote unquote bad guys are doing?
Right. So again, ideal world and people making good decisions, right? And legislation following quickly after that. It's almost like we think internet and social media. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from our participants here? We've gone over time already, so may as well, you know, if you have a burning question still to ask. And I do hope that Matt will be able to interact with us more, perhaps in next term. So there will be that. But Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I was just going to say I'm happy to stick around, answer more questions. I'm also happy to. Let me just. I have a last slide for this that I can share. So if anyone wants to contact me, are we looking at it yet? Hold on, I got to find it.
We're looking at a live demo with some exclamation.
There we go. Okay.
There.
So this is how you would, you can, my NYU email, you can find me on Twitter. My website is probably, I don't know, if you just want to look at more of the projects I talked about or things like that. If you're interested in the Game Center, you can check out the Game Center website, or if you want to follow OpenAir or come check out our website. We'd love to have some of you join us if you're interested. We really are about like empowering people as much as possible to have a outsized impact on fighting climate change. So I can leave this up. I can also send this to somebody at Waterloo.
Yeah, sure.
Send it out to the participants.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously I have Matt's coordinates if anyone is interested in having a direct link to Matt. And Matt, maybe we can get you here in the winter. We'll see. COVID and other things notwithstanding.
Yeah, maybe we won't be allowed in the country we're going back to America for sometime in December. Maybe after that they won't let us back for.
But just stay here. You just stay.
You said that allows me to stay here beyond the end of December, so I would. That, you know, I'd be willing to discuss that if that changes, but I feel like admitting in a public forum that I'm going to stay illegally would be a bad move. I'll put it like
probably. But I see some comments in the chat that the talk has been really interesting, and so thank you very much on our collective behalf, Matt, for taking the time today. For those of you who are still here, and we had a fairly large audience, so again, thanks very much to our HCI colleagues for moving and shifting their own meeting to accommodate Matt's talk, and I can see some applause in the audience. So thank you very much, Matt.